Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History webinar series. I'm Marin, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide a smooth webinar. Our upcoming webinar next week is on the 19th. That'll be a Wednesday at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be with Kathryn Grant, and she'll be giving a presentation about navigating in Family Tree. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. During the webinar, if you have technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from Kathryn, who will be giving a presentation on web indexing. Kathryn Grant, after years on the sidelines, started doing family history and discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton's Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. Kathryn works for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a technical writer and an instructional designer focusing on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and spring lilacs. So as Kathryn gets ready to start the presentation, I'll just remind you that you can use the chat box for questions, and those will be addressed at the end of the webinar. And if you have any technical difficulties, just go ahead and use the chat box, and I'll address those for you.
And everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. It's so good to have you with us. And we are talking about a really, really exciting topic, which is FamilySearch web indexing. This is a very introductory webinar. So if you've already done a lot of indexing, then this probably wouldn't be as useful to you, but you might find it useful in training other people. And if you are just starting out or you've never done indexing, you've come to the right place. So let's take a look at what we'll be covering in today's webinar. First of all, just briefly, we're going to talk about why indexing matters, why it's so important. And then we'll talk about how to get started. We'll actually walk through indexing your first batch. Then we'll talk about something very important that everybody always wants to know, which is if I get stuck, how do I get help? And then finally, we'll also talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is indexing in a different language than your native language. And for most of us on this webinar, we'll assume that that's probably English is our native language. So we'll talk about indexing in a language other than English, although the principles that we'll talk about will apply to anybody who indexes in a language that is not their native language. So why does indexing matter? Well, it's because indexing turns this, you see this image with kind of difficult to read handwriting and lines and marks and so forth. Well, it turns that into something like this, which is easier to read, it's organized, and maybe best of all, it's searchable. I've been surprised as I've talked with people who have actually done indexing that they didn't understand the value of their work and where it ended up. So I wanted to touch on that briefly. When you index records for FamilySearch, they actually end up here in historical records. And so you get to historical records by clicking the search button at the top of pretty much any FamilySearch.org page. Whenever you search for a record on this page, chances are very, very high that you're going to find a record that a volunteer indexed for you. And they made it possible for you to find that information about your family. So indexing is so important. And this is the main place where it ends up. But also, you're probably familiar with record hints that you see on the Pearson page. Those are also records that have been indexed, almost all of them by volunteers. And these hints right here on the page are particularly helpful. FamilySearch has gotten really good at their algorithms for supplying hints on the Pearson page. In my experience, these hints will be probably somewhere around 95% to 98% accurate. In other words, if you see them over here, there's a very, very high chance that they do have to do with the person whose page you're on. So that's where the indexed records end up, and that kind of helps us see why they're so valuable. So if you want to start indexing, how do you do it? Well, the first thing you do, it's so easy. If you're on a full screen, so if you're on a laptop or a wide monitor, you go to the indexing option at the top of pretty much any FamilySearch page. If I can get the slide to advance, there we go. You go to the indexing option on the top of pretty much any FamilySearch page, and then you'll get a drop down when you hover over that indexing option. And the drop down will have a web indexing option, and you just click that and it will take you to the home page. But I also wanted to indicate, because so many of us are working on many different devices, sometimes we're on our phone, sometimes we're on a tablet, sometimes we're on a full monitor or laptop. So if you don't see the options that I just displayed, but instead you see these little icons at the top, those show up when your screen is narrower. And if you click indexing here, you won't get a drop down, but you will go to the indexing overview page. And from this page, you will see actually up here the options that you saw on the drop down on a full screen. So again, here you just click web indexing, and that will take us to the main screen for indexing. When you get to, oh, I forgot, I wanted to say one other thing. When you go to the page for the very first time, FamilySearch is going to kick off a welcome email to you. The reason I wanted to mention this is that a person I was helping said, hey, I got this email and it said, thank you for signing up. And I didn't sign up for anything. So, well, maybe it's not worded exactly accurately, but the purpose is they want to thank you for getting involved in indexing. And this email that you get will also have some good introductory information in it. So it will have a link to the web indexing page, making it easy to get there, and it will include some help information that you may find useful. So I just wanted to alert you that if you get an email saying thanks for signing up and you didn't sign up, it's really a welcome email that will kind of give you some good information for getting started. So back to the home page. If you have never indexed before, when you go to the home indexing page or the main page, you are going to see a guided tour. This is brilliant. Whoever thought of this, my hat is totally off to them, because what it is an actual sample batch that a new indexer can index in a safe environment. Let's take a look at it. So when you want to start the guided tour, you just click Open Batch, and you get this pop-up screen, and it says, welcome to the guided tour. Maybe the most important piece of information on this screen is that this is a practice session and your data will not be saved. Why do I think that's so cool? Because it totally takes away the fear of making a mistake. You're free to experiment, you're free to make as many mistakes as you want and to fix them, and to just consider this a learning experience. So it's a wonderful way to get familiar with indexing if you've never done it before, or if you've never done it for FamilySearch. Maybe you've done it for a genealogical society or something, but you've never used FamilySearch's platform. This is a great way to get familiar with how to do it. So to start the tour, you click Start Tour, kind of logical, right? And you're going to see a screen that looks something like this. The first thing that you want to do is read the project instructions. That is probably the most important factor in your success as an indexer. Those instructions will give you pretty much everything you need to know about indexing this project successfully. Even in this kind of test or sandbox environment, it still serves that purpose. So definitely take a few minutes to read those instructions. You'll be glad that you did. If the instructions are in the way of something you're trying to see, it's really easy to move them. Just put your mouse over the purple bar, the title bar, and just drag it to a different position. You can also make the project instructions box bigger or smaller by dragging this handle in the lower right-hand corner. If you're done reading the instructions, you just click X to close them. And you can also drag to reposition the image. You notice that this image is behind the white box. It's actually behind both boxes, which makes it a little hard to see. Well, you can close the project instructions, but you don't want to close these other instructions because that's our guidance, as we're going to see in a minute. So once you have maybe closed this, but the image is still not easy to see, you can just drag it to another position so it's no longer behind that white box. The tour then provides step-by-step guidance, and this is probably the most helpful aspect of the tour next to the project instructions, or in addition, I would say, to the project instructions. This will guide you absolutely step by step through everything that you need to do to index this batch successfully. So you see up here at the top, we've got the first instruction, examine the image, and you're on step 1 of 7. And the pointer is pointing to the area where you need to follow the instructions. So honestly, I can't imagine it being more helpful. It's just amazing. So you read through the instructions and then you do everything you need to do. And when you're ready, you click next. When you click next, you're going to see a new set of instructions and it's going to move to step 2 and it's going to be pointing to the new field on the screen that you need to take action on. And that will continue until you've gone through all 7 steps. So then when you're done, you will get back to the main screen and actually the guided tour will be removed after you submit it. So it won't be there any longer, but there's a couple of other things to be aware of. If you decide to start your own batch without doing the guided tour will disappear, probably to avoid confusion. But if you do your first batch and then you finish it and submit it, and there's no other batches active, the guided tour will come back until you've completed 5 batches. And they figure after you've done 5 batches, probably you don't need the guided tour anymore, so it's removed from your list of batches. But suppose that you wanted to get back to it and try it again, or you wanted to help a family member take it or something like that. There's a real easy way to get back to it, and that is to go back to this main page before you actually get into the place where you see the batches, and you click Overview, and then you scroll down the page and you will get to a section where it has a link to the guided tour. So even if you finished it and it disappears from your batches, it's really easy to get back to it. Okay, we've talked about how to get started. Now let's talk about when you're ready to index your first batch. Before we get into that, there are 3 terms that are super important to understand, and they may not necessarily be obvious, especially to a new indexer. So for that reason, I wanted to talk about them. The first one is the term batch. And batch simply means a group or a set of images that are to be indexed. So you can imagine there's billions of records that need to be indexed, right? And so they have to break them into these smaller batches to give them to volunteers. So whenever you see the word batch, just know that that's referring to a set of images that can be indexed in a reasonable amount of time by a volunteer. Every batch consists of images, and basically that just means one digital page. And on the next slides, we'll be actually seeing some examples of that. And then finally, you'll also see reference to entries. And entries refer to individual events on a page. So let's take a look at the pictures, because I think pictures really help, or images help to explain those. So here we're looking at a batch that I am in the process, or was in the process of indexing. And you see down here, it shows the 3 images that make up that batch. So a batch is always going to consist of just a few images that the indexer needs to index. And then the digital page, every image is one digital page, and it displays here in the main area of the indexing screen. And then finally, every event on that page will become an entry when you're indexing. So for example, this is a parish register from England, and it is for baptisms, infant baptisms for children. You notice there's 2 columns on this image, and each column has 8 events, or 8 christenings. So you're going to make 8 entries for each column, a total of 16 for this digital image. So just remember that an entry is equivalent to an event on whatever image you're looking at. If you think back to that military record in the guided tour, there was only one event on that. It was a draft registration. So draft registrations don't have multiple events on a screen, or on a digital page, excuse me, I should say. So just be aware that you could have any place from 1 event to probably 16 is about the most I've ever seen as far as entries. Although I guess censuses would have been an exception to that, but I think because they've got 50 entries on a digital page. But as far as I know, the censuses are all done for now until some new ones are released. So mostly you're going to see any place from maybe 1 entry to about 16 entries max. So how do you find a batch that you would be interested in doing? On this home page, you would click Find Batches, and you get taken to a screen that looks like this. On the right side of the screen, you're going to see a list of all the open batches that still need work to be done. This list is constantly changing because people are constantly finishing projects, and they're constantly releasing new ones. So if you look through it and you don't necessarily find something that you're interested in, try again in a few days and you might find something. So on the right, we see a list of everything that needs to be indexed. And on the left, we see a simple search screen. I did want to point out that you can choose how to sort the batches that are showing up there, the projects that are showing up. If you click this drop down at the top of the page, you've got a choice of all these different options: A to Z, Z to A, newest, oldest, most complete, least complete. So for instance, if you wanted to work on a project that wasn't having a lot of progress, you could come in here and choose least complete, and then you would be able to help out with some of those projects that really need it. So there are 2 ways to find batches on this screen. One is by scrolling and one is by searching. So let's look at that. On the right, you just simply scroll down, or if you've got a touch device, just swipe down and you'll be able to see the various items, and they will be sorted by whatever is showing up there in the sort by drop down. Or you can search. So if you're looking for something more specific, that may be a better option for you than scrolling. So I wanted to show 2 quick examples of how I searched to find something I was particularly interested in. In this first example, I wanted something super easy, and I definitely wanted it in English this time. So on this left search panel, I clicked the beginning checkbox, And I selected English. Actually, to be truthful, English was already the default, but I left it at English and I didn't choose a different language. And then I clicked search, and this is the result that I got. On this particular day, there was only one beginning English batch available, or one project, excuse me, to be indexed, and this was it. And so if I had wanted to do that project, I would have clicked the indexing button to start doing a batch from that project. Here's another example. So I love doing English parish registers because they're so useful. I'm relatively familiar with them, so I'm pretty comfortable with them. So in the search text box, I typed the word parish register, and I didn't care about the difficulty level, but I definitely did want English. So I left it in English, but I didn't check any of those check boxes for difficulty. And this is the result I got. Oh, excuse me. Then I clicked search, and this is the result I got. At the time that I ran this search, there were two projects of parish registers from which I could choose batches. Okay, so then when I was ready to index the batch, I would just click index. And again, you'll see a screen very similar to what we saw when we were looking at the guided tour. And I wanted to mention, I don't think I can emphasize this enough, that you will be so much more successful at indexing if you take time to read the project instructions. I wanted to mention this because we are living in a very impatient society. Have you all noticed that? We want instant gratification. We text people, and if they don't answer us in 5 seconds, we're upset or offended, or why aren't they getting back with me immediately? We have instant access to all kinds of entertainment. We can ask Google a question and get an instantaneous response. But everything in life isn't like that. Some things do take patience. The reason I put this acronym on the screen, some of you might be familiar with it. It stands for too long, didn't read. And so sometimes people will kind of facetiously or even seriously respond to somebody's email or text or whatever by saying TLDR, didn't read it. And in a way, it's almost, I mean, if people mean it as a joke, that's totally good. I get that. But if we're serious about it, we're kind of saying, oh, that wasn't important enough to me to put any effort into reading it. If it wasn't quick and fast, I'm just not going to do it. Well, in indexing, we kind of don't want to have that attitude because the information that's communicated in the project instructions is so important to our success. So don't fall prey to TLDR, at least when you're reading the indexing instructions. If you close them and you find that, oh my goodness, I forgot there was that one thing about what to do with the mother's maiden name, now I can't remember it. Well, it's so easy to get the project instructions back. You just click on this link as shown on the screen, or there's another icon at the top that you can click to get the project instructions back. Now this image right here, that's kind of tiny, isn't it? I am probably nobody, except if they have like major microscopic vision, is going to be indexing a digital page of that size. So you can use the plus and the minus to adjust the size so it's comfortable for you. These menus at the top provide common options to use when you're indexing. I didn't want to take the time to go through those because they're mostly self-evident, but in case you run across one that's not, later on in the webinar, we're going to be talking about how to get help. The icons here may not be quite as self-explanatory as the words up there, but don't worry, because if you hover over an icon, it's going to tell you exactly what that icon is for. So the first step of every indexing project is to determine if each image should be indexed. Now you might say, why on earth do I do that? Why would there ever be an image in a batch that didn't need indexing? Well, it is pretty rare, they're pretty careful about it, but once in a while, something slips in. For instance, a blank page is accidentally in a batch. There's nothing to index. So you would say no to should that page or should that image be indexed. I've also seen, again, very rarely, but once in a blue moon, I've also seen a page that will have maybe the clergyman's notes about just in general, you know, this covers the parish of such and I did it in the year such and such. So it's not anything that has to be indexed, but it got slipped into the batch. And so that's another example of when you would say, no, that particular image does not need to be indexed. So you walk through every image in the batch and tell the system whether or not it contains indexable data. And when you finish doing that, you're going to see a, a question, or yeah, pretty much a question, a field that is going to ask you to specify the entry type. And again, remember that entry means event. So most of the time, this is going to be a life event, like a birth or a christening or a marriage or a burial or something like that, or a military registration. But it will be some event in the life of a person. So you just click the drop down and you choose the appropriate event. What I love too, not only does FamilySearch provide wonderful project instructions, but almost every field that I've ever seen, I'm trying to even think if there's an exception, and I'm not sure I've ever seen one. So probably every single field is going to have this purple icon on it with a question mark. It provides simple instructions for that specific field. So in this example, if I click this icon, this purple question mark icon, I get this little flyout screen. And it very simply and quickly, it tells me exactly what I need to do to fill out that field. Don't you just love it? And so when you're done, you just click the X and it closes that flyout screen and you move on to the next field. So in this example, this was for a christening, and once I had selected the entry type up here at the top, then it showed all these additional fields that needed to be indexed. And of course, the information over here in the parish register is the information that I put in each of these fields. When you get finished with one particular entry, then it's going to ask you, is there another entry? And again, remember that means another event. Well, in this case, I had only done the top entry here for the Anderson family, for Harry Anderson. And so clearly there's a lot more that has to be indexed on this page. So I go ahead and click Create Entry To, then I get another blank set of fields that I can fill out for the next person on the image. Now, here's the thing, if you love saving time, often when you're indexing a set of christenings, the christening event is always going to be the same. The christening year is most of the time going to be the same, unless it straddles December to January. And then the month may also be the same for quite a few of the entries. Whenever you're actually on a field, if you hit Control D on a PC or Command D on a Mac, it's going to remember what you did for the previous entry. So on this second entry for this family, the Bunting family, it's going to remember what I did for the previous entry of the Anderson family. And if I put Command D or Control D, it's going to put that information on the field. So in this case, the christening event was the same, the year was the same, and the month was the same. So I just went Control D, Control D, Control D, and in less than a second, I had completed 3 fields, or about a second, I'd completed 3 fields. So that keyboard shortcut can get very useful for you if there's a lot of identical information from event to event or from entry to entry. You can also click the icon, the duplicate icon that's shown here on the screen. But personally, I didn't find that that saved me much time because I had to take my hands off the keyboard, use the mouse, click the button. And yes, it did duplicate the previous entry, but by then it had kind of taken me longer than just either selecting it myself or hitting Control D. But honestly, it's a matter of personal preference. So if you're a person who likes using the mouse and that's very comfortable for you, then this is how you can do duplication using the mouse. When you finish indexing all entries on an image and there's another image, you click Next Image. So in this example, this is actually a different example where we've got a batch of 5 different images. I'm on the first one and I finished it, but now I want to move to the next one. So I'm going to click Next Image to get the fields that I need up here to complete for those subsequent images. When all entries on all images are indexed, this is not a rule of FamilySearch. So this is just something personal that I like to do. I like to use the arrow key up there and quickly go back to the very first entry and then go through every entry and just kind of sanity check it. Because sometimes when you're doing christening after christening after christening, they blend together, right? And it might be really easy. Maybe I did the duplicate function when I shouldn't have, or maybe I typed the dad's name in the kid's name field or something like that. So I like to go back and just sanity check it. I don't spend like hours and hours of time, but I do just carefully look at it, compare it to the image, and just make sure that I didn't miss anything obvious. I'll be honest with you. Those of you who've heard my webinars before know that I really feel that it's important to rely on the Lord when doing family history. And so I will pray over this indexing, and that might seem maybe like overkill or something, but honestly, I don't think it is, because when I've said a prayer and I've looked back over the things that I've indexed, I found mistakes that I've made. And I think that it may very well have been due to help from the Lord that my prayer was answered and my eyes were drawn to areas where I made mistakes. And so I was able to fix them. And that's so wonderful, because what if my mistake, what if it was a misspelling or something that made it so that somebody didn't find their ancestor? So for me, it's worth it to take that little bit of extra time to go back and just sanity check every entry, make sure I haven't missed anything obvious. And then I feel more comfortable that I'm submitting something that's quality work. When you get done, you are going to see a button to submit batch. And then FamilySearch runs a quality check. And you might say, well, if FamilySearch runs it, why did you do your own quality check? I'll tell you why. I love technology. I've used technology for years. My dad worked for IBM, so we always had cutting edge technology in our home. I love technology and appreciate the value of it, but there are things that you can catch by the Spirit that technology won't catch. So to me, going by the Spirit and using technology are complementary tools that can be used together. So I do my own careful check before, but then I also take advantage of the FamilySearch check, which runs automatically. Let's look at an example of a mistake that the FamilySearch quality check might find. So let's suppose that I was doing a record and the clergyman forgot to write down the christening day. So I left it blank, even though it was a required field. And let's suppose that the kids on either side had totally different christening dates, so I couldn't assume the christening date or extrapolate it because they were all May 5th, for example. I simply have no way of knowing when that child was really christened. So I leave it blank because I don't know the day, but Quality Check flags it and says, hey, christening day is a required field. Well, since there isn't a christening day in our example, then what I do is click accept to tell the system that, hey, this is the best we can do. We don't have the data, even though it's required, so we're just going to have to accept a blank field. On the other hand, let's suppose that I had maybe not done my personal review and I had forgotten, just simply skipped accidentally a field. But when I go back to the image, the date is actually there. So then I go ahead and make corrections. And when I've corrected every problem, the error message automatically disappears. And I see a notice like this: no issues found. Would you like to submit your work? So then I just go ahead and I click Submit Batch. And then it's time to celebrate. We get a screen, and because this is a screenshot, you can't really see it, but see these little dots all over? Those are confetti. And when you're really in the system, confetti will drop down on the screen, and it's really cool. So you're just having a little celebration there because you finished your batch successfully. Okay, so now you know the basics of how to index, but as you know, in family history, everything is not always straightforward. You're always going to run into some little glitch or anomaly or something unexpected. So where do you turn if you need help? There are lots and lots of places. We've already mentioned that the project instructions and the field helps will provide you really good help. I wanted to mention that I was talking with a consultant friend of mine who loved indexing, loves indexing, does a lot of it in her state, and people contact her for help. She said that about 98% of the time, when people ask a question, the answer is already in the project instructions or in the field helps. So what she'll do, she's not rude about it, but what she'll do is she'll help the person find the answer that they need in the project instructions or in the field helps. So always check there first. Most likely your question is going to get answered there. Also, when you're actually indexing, there's a help option at the top of the screen, and it's got a drop down, which not coincidentally includes field help and project instructions, but it's also got some other great resources. So any of those you can take advantage of. I wanted to mention two that may not be obvious down here: Share Batch and Open Shared Batch. What shared batches are, let me explain by saying what happens. When you click Share Batch, so let's suppose, let me back up a minute. When would you use shared batches? Well, suppose that you are looking at an image and the handwriting is just, oh my goodness, so difficult to read. You're doing a pretty decent job on most of it, but you come to one place name that you just can't determine what it is. It doesn't look like anything familiar. The writing is cramped and squiggly, and you just do not know what it is. But let's say, for example, that it's German handwriting. But you think that probably somewhere there's an expert in German handwriting who's familiar with place names and familiar with the writing. They may be able to solve this mystery for you. So you want to share the batch with them. What you do is you click Share Batch, and a screen pops up and it gives you a number. They call it a code. And so you write down that code, and then you go to the Facebook Share Batch page, or maybe you go to your expert. Suppose that you have an expert in your stake or something, and you give them that code. Then they come to the indexing page, they click Open Shared Batch, and they put in that code, and then they can see the same batch that you're working on. Isn't that ingenious? That is just such a great way to get help. And especially the Facebook, I'm going to be giving you instructions for Facebook, the Facebook Share Batch page later. But you can go there, and anybody on that Facebook page might be able to answer your questions. So you've got access to a whole crew of people that can help you out. And I just love that. You can almost always find an answer to your question by turning to people who can help you. Another place that you can get help is on that main page. Do you remember we looked at that page that had the menu, overview, web indexing? The way you get to it is either by clicking indexing, not hovering, but clicking, or by using these menu options up here to navigate. And you can click Help Resources, and you get the items that are shown below. You notice the guided tour is available there, and you've got other helpful items. What about that old handwriting? Let's talk a little bit more about some of the resources that can help you with that. One is that when you're right in the process of indexing, you can click this little pen with a squiggly, and it brings up this box right here. Now, this is not an exhaustive box, but it's got a lot of the most common ways that these letters are written in old manuscripts. So you may very well be able to find the answer to your question here. But if you don't, there are other resources. So you can go to that Help Resources page. Remember that we got here by clicking Help Resources. That's also an option on the indexing dropdown. And then when you get in there, you want to click Language and Handwriting Helps. The first thing that you see when you get in there is an expanded chart of how some people made letters in old manuscripts. So you can look on that, and you notice it's divided by capitals and little letters. Then off to the side, you've also got all these other options that you can check out that will give you help. And even further down on this page, there's a handwriting game. It didn't fit on the screen because I didn't have enough room, but that would be a fun thing to try too. You can also get help locally from your ward temple and family history consultant. You can find them in tools if you've got that on your mobile device, but if you don't have it on your mobile device, or you're right here on the website and you just quickly want to find it on the FamilySearch site, then you can click Help up here and you get this drop down. One of the options is Contact Us, and when you click that, you get a screen like this, and that shows you your assigned temple and family history consultants in your ward or branch. Another resource that I think is just phenomenal is a set of YouTube videos made by one of the indexing leaders at FamilySearch named Jason Pearson. So if you go out to YouTube, oops, sorry, went too fast there. If you go out to YouTube and you search for FamilySearch web indexing Jason Pearson, you will come up with a set of very helpful videos. And I would strongly recommend those if you're new to indexing. So what about online communities? We've got Yammer, which is an amazing community. You can go to this URL and then choose View All Your Groups, Discover More Groups, and search for indexing. We've got Facebook, which I mentioned earlier. There's the generic Facebook indexing group, which you can just search for. And then there's the group that's specifically dedicated to sharing batches. So if you've got a batch number and you want that group to take a look at it, then that's where you would post that number. And then finally, FamilySearch has also got a community. And so if you click that same help button that we were looking at before in the upper right-hand corner of any FamilySearch.org page, or almost any FamilySearch.org page, then choose community and choose groups and search for indexing, and you'll find some groups there. Right now, there's more groups on Yammer for indexing, but the FamilySearch community is growing. So you will be seeing more indexing groups start there, no doubt, in the future. Okay, let's talk about one of my very, very favorite topics in conclusion, and that is indexing in another language. In other words, a language that is not your native language. That might sound difficult, but it is a lot easier than you might think. There is an urgent need for language indexers. So these are the latest stats that I got from two wonderful missionaries that are doing a lot of foreign language indexing. And right now, this is actually a lot better than it used to be. We used to only have 8% of records in non-English languages. Thanks to many dedicated volunteers, that has bumped up to 22%, which is wonderful. It's a great accomplishment. But guess what? Do you guys remember, if any of you remember the Ensign article that was published in 2000, it talked about a major milestone that the Church of Jesus Christ had reached, and that was that we had more non-English speaking members, or more members whose native language was not English, than those whose native language was English. This was so exciting. This was like a big step to becoming a global church. And we are truly, the Church of Jesus Christ is truly now a global church. So more than 50% of our members do not speak English as their native language. What's wrong with this picture? We've got under a quarter of records that are in another language than English, but over half of our members speak another language than English. We have got to make records available to these faithful saints all over the world who want to do their family history just as badly as everybody else, but they don't have easy access to the records they need. So how easy is it to index in another language? I'll tell you. So you can help if you know another language from a mission or living abroad. And there are tons of us who served foreign missions or who went on study abroad or who maybe were raised by bilingual parents. There's so many people that I run across all the time who know another language. And you don't have to be perfect in it. You just have to know enough. So to that point, if you even have basic familiarity with another language, such as from a high school class, you can successfully index in that language. You don't have to be fluent. And I'll show you some fantastic helps for foreign language indexers. Again, remember on help resources, we saw that there's that language and handwriting helps. So if you go to that page, you're going to see one thing that I think is maybe one of the best kept secrets, but one of the most valuable assets for a foreign language indexer, and that is this Latin genealogical word list. Now, you might not be inclined to click on that based on the title, and the title is actually inaccurate. It's outdated. This link no longer goes to just a Latin list, and actually it hasn't for ages. I think maybe it did at one time, but now it goes to a list of tons of different languages. So we've got Afrikaans there, we've got Arabic, we've got Armenian, Chinese. So we've got Latin, and that's helpful maybe if you're reading an old will that's written in Latin, but we've got boatloads of other languages. When you click on one of these lists, what you will get is something like this. I brought up a Dutch. I lived in Holland when I was younger, but I remember very little of the language. So I'm in no sense fluent, but I have enough of an understanding of it that I can comfortably index in the Dutch language. So when I click that list, I come up with, there's more on the page, but I wanted to focus on the keywords section where they will list words that you would commonly see on records that you index, like birth, burial, children, father, mother, etc. Now, one thing that I actually think I'll suggest that I found as an indexer, it would have been more helpful to me if these foreign words were listed in alphabetical order, because I already know the English word. What I want to know is, for instance, I come across the word overladen on a Dutch record and I have no clue what that means. Well, that's what I want to look up. Well, the English is listed in alphabetical order, not the Dutch. So I either have to read the whole list, which I can do, that's not, which is not a problem, but there is a faster way to find those words. And that is to use the Control F function on your browser. Control F, as in FamilySearch, means find. And on every browser that I'm aware of, you can hit Control F on a PC or Command F on a Mac, and it brings up a little search screen. So what I would do on this word page, if I wanted to find overladen, is I would hit Control F and I would type in overladen, and then it would pop me right to the place on the page where it appears. So that's a way that you can easily find a word that you have no idea what it means. You can also access the genealogical word list straight from the wiki. So suppose you're already on the wiki or you don't want to navigate to the language helps, just go to the wiki, type in genealogical word list, and it will bring up that earlier list that we looked at. Another wonderful resource for languages, we haven't talked about this drop-down before. It defaults to English, at least I'm supposing for English speakers. My guess is if your browser has a different language, it's going to default to a different language, but I don't know that for sure. But in any event, it's a drop-down that has a list of some common languages there. And when you choose that, like in this example, I have chosen French. So all those things that used to be there for English, those have disappeared, and I now have a list of resources that will help me with the French language. So that is another wonderful thing to help you if you choose to index in a non-English language. Communities, again, are very helpful if you're indexing in a non-English language. So this is just the same slide from before, but I wanted to show it again as a reminder that you can get great help. In fact, I've seen it where people have maybe been indexing in French and they found a native French speaker on an online community. What a great source of getting help with a difficult French record, right? So communities are a wonderful place to get language indexing help. In conclusion, I love this quote by Michael Judson, who wrote a FamilySearch blog article. He said, and I've got to hope I can read this without crying because it just hits me. Indexing is so important. Like seeds planted in good soil, your indexing efforts are multiplying, and the internet is being flooded with freely searchable records as a result. Thank you for being one who is making such a huge difference to those who are looking to make those amazing connections to their past. So go indexers. I hope that you will all get excited about indexing. If you're not already, probably you were. That's probably why you're on this webinar. But I hope that you move forward now with indexing and that just becomes a wonderful part of your life, and also that you invite other people to get involved. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. And Marin, do we have any questions that we need to address?
It doesn't look like we have any at the moment, but the chat box is now open for questions. If anybody has a question, you're welcome to type it into the chat box. It doesn't look like we have any questions, but the audience just wants to thank Kathryn for her wonderful presentation. And it looks like Charlene commented that she's going to use it when teaching their youth.
Oh, wonderful, Charlene, that's fantastic. Youth are great at indexing. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's a great way to get youth familiar with family history records.
And it looks like one viewer commented that they love a class on memories. Maybe we can put that on our list of webinar suggestions to do a webinar on. I believe that James Tanner has done a webinar on FamilySearch memories, but I'd have to confirm that. But we'll definitely add that to our list. I'm just gonna move over to the closing announcements. Looks like we have another comment. Daryl Frame says Google Translate is also a great reference for indexing languages,
Oh,
indexing in
yes.
another language.
That's a great suggestion, yeah.
Alrighty. So our I'm just opening up the closing announcement screen. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday with Kathryn again. That'll be at the same time, 3 p.m. Mountain Time, and we'll be talking about navigating in a family tree. So I hope that you can make time to watch that webinar with us on the 19th. A recording of this webinar will be available to share with those that you'd like to share this video with to learn more about indexing. That'll be available on our YouTube page and on our website. If you have any questions or any suggestions, you're welcome to email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu, and I'll get to those as quick as you send them in. Our website is fh.lib.byu.edu, and you can find out more information about our upcoming webinars and what else is going on at the BYU Family History Library. Thank you so much, and we hope that you have a wonderful weekend.